holiday weekend. Obviously, traditionally, this would be the start of the new school year and the end of summer, but there's nothing traditional or normal about this year. But we do face an incredibly busy and important 3 months ahead of us, to be dominated, no doubt, by two incredibly important stories that I think will take all of our focus: COVID-19 and the U.S. Elections. And I think that for these next 3 months, we will focus tremendously on those two storylines, and probably have never seen 3 months like we're about to see. So here we go. I want to just say a word about last night's two documentaries that aired about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Both were terrific and really a testament to the tremendous job that this team has done under the most difficult of circumstances. Melissa Dunst and her team that produced the 2-hour documentary on Donald Trump.
Ask a question.
Del Rosa and her team that produced the 2-hour documentary on Joe Biden under Jim Murphy's guidance and Michael's leadership. It was a terrific night of reporting and storytelling, and I just want to note that, thank them, and congratulate them, and to their entire teams. I also want to make sure that everybody is aware we have promoted LJ Spate to executive producer of Early Start, and so congratulations to LJ, who's been helming that show for a long time and done a terrific job, and is now rightfully so the executive producer of that program. With that, let us move our attention to the day's news, and let's start with Matthew and COVID.
Thanks, Jeff. As you say, we come out of Labor Day to the unofficial start of a season like no other. The immediate worries, will the numbers show a post-holiday surge again? What will happen to the millions more kids going back to school, mostly online this week, and where do things really stand on a vaccine? This morning, the U.S. stands at over 6.3 million cases and will likely cross 190,000 deaths today. The numbers from the last couple of days, obviously unusually low, probably a function of holiday weekend tabulating. It'll be a couple, 3 weeks until we see real results of any upshot of the Labor Day weekend events that we showed over the past couple of days. This morning, with all of the trust issues around the vaccine safety prospects, this unprecedented joint pledge from the CEOs of 9 top pharma companies, all saying they will not seek premature approval of a vaccine. This, of course, as the president rattles confidence yet again with his statements yesterday, and a federal health official close to warp speed tells CNN, I don't know of any scientist involved in the effort who thinks we'll be getting shots into our arms anytime before Election Day. But, of course, you've got the BioNTech-Pfizer partnership, the CEO of BioNTech telling CNN they could be ready to submit for approval in October, and the Pfizer CEO saying we will have an answer by the end of October. So a lot of questions of exactly who and what to believe on vaccines. Schools are a big story this week. Millions more returning to school, mostly online. First, there's been another cyber attack derailing online and in-person learning. Hartford, Connecticut canceled what was to be the first day of school today after a ransomware attack hobbled its systems. Obviously, this followed what happened allegedly at the hands of a teen to Miami-Dade's system last week. But we've got the first day of school in places like Houston and Dallas and Baltimore and all the big suburban D.C. counties. The largest ones tend to be all online, but some states, some districts have a mix, like New Jersey, where the governor just described the mix on New Day. And then on the college front, it is just a story of student behavior derailing campus returns all over still. Things went from bad to worse at WVU, which first disciplined a couple dozen students and a fraternity for illicit parties. Now, WVU has suspended all in-person classes for 2 weeks, citing super-spreading fears from those parties. Cases in all 50 states at campuses, some schools with hundreds or over 1,000 cases each. Bianca Rodriguez stays across the education angles today. Looking at the key data points, the numbers and the regions, the hotspots still shifting, and we are seeing some former hotspots starting to tick back up again after coming down. On the big CNN map, 11 states up this week, 24 steady, 15 down when it comes to average new cases. The top states for increases in daily case averages right now, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in that order. Fourth is Arizona, which made major progress that we reported on, but ticked up 21% this week. We talked a lot over the past week about whether success and better numbers might accidentally lead to some complacency. Florida's weeks of decline are slowing. They're flattening out. Florida is currently up 20% week to week, as Florida is about to cross the 12,000 death mark. Rosa up in Miami. We've got Diane Gallagher in Atlanta. I'll note one other key number, the U.S. positivity rate, which has hovered at or just under 6% for weeks now. This is a key indicator of where things are going, and there has not been a substantive change here. And just because a few different people have asked about it, we're going through this economics professor's modeling study on the Sturgis motorcycle rally. It lays out a theory suggesting that more than 250,000 cases could be tied to the rally. Again, this is highly theoretical modeling, not currently backed up by any public health data. They lay out the theory. We're going through it, but let's hold off until health can review the assertions made in that paper. It's a huge number. In terms of health headlines, minority enrollment still lagging in vaccine trials, as we've been noting for the past few days. And now an NIH group has released a series of TV ads asking Black people and Latinos to become more involved in clinical trials. We will watch for news out of this big Research America 2020 forum. We'll hear from Fauci at 1 p.m. on Science on the Front Lines, and there'll be a 2 o'clock panel on whether we're at a turning point on vaccines. We will also get a study released at 11 o'clock showing the correlation between following stay-at-home orders in the spring and drops in the spread. We've got Sanjay and Elizabeth available. And then just one other note here. Gene Cazares on the story of a class action suit being announced at 10 o'clock against 2 New Jersey nursing homes that we've reported on in the past. They're accused of hiding 17 COVID deaths, hiding information from families, actually storing the bodies. And Gene is on that. And we've got the rap pieces today, which are Erica Hill for 4, 6, and 8, and Nick Watt for 5, 7, and 9. I'll pause here.
Okay, and I just want to note, I want to stay away from this Sturgis story. It's just way too theoretical at this point, unless Ben and the health team give us different guidance. International COVID.
Yeah, so we're very much focused on the vaccine angle as well, as Matthew mentioned, and Fred has this exclusive interview with the CEO of BioNTech that he flagged. Just real sense of optimism that we could be nearing the finishing line on this. He says that as Matthew said, it could be ready for approval by mid-October, but he also described it as a near-perfect vaccine, a near-perfect profile. So we're running that. Fred's available live with that and sound in a package later, but against the backdrop of this pledge, as these companies desperately attempt to depoliticize science and show that they're trying to bring something to market that is credible and that people might be confident enough to take. So that's really the big strand for us today.
Okay, thank you very much. Business.
Jeff, good morning. Markets under pressure this morning following last week's tech drought, the worst since March. Dow is down. NASDAQ really under pressure. Investors also rattled by the president continuing to blame China for the virus and also threatening to punish American companies that create jobs in that country. Clearly, last week's market slide not stopping the president from convincing Americans that the economy is roaring back and next year is certain to be a blockbuster, suggesting that President Joe Biden will crush the markets. But of course, as Christina Leshy has been reporting the past few months, market analysts from some big name banks do not believe Biden to be a threat to the markets. Of course, most economists expect expecting the economy to bounce back. Job gains have been historically sharp, but listen, this is only because the economy had a historic collapse in the second quarter, and at this moment, nearly 30 million people are on some form of jobless aid. Julia Chatterley is up and available on those threads this morning. And as I mentioned, these Americans on assistance, Lauren Fox reporting that the House is out this week, but Senate Republicans hoping to vote on a stimulus package that doesn't actually have any future, but could clearly offer some limited political cover. Perhaps one catalyst for the agreement is the government funding deadline, which is expected to run out at the end of this month. Lauren and Manu are up on those threads, and that is where we begin on COVID.
Okay, thank you. I do think that from a business standpoint, this is also, we do need to be looking at, things that are returning to normal this week in terms of business, such as movie theaters. The NFL starts Thursday. Just, society as it's happening. And I want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. Washington, COVID.
Okay, so the politics of COVID. Yesterday we saw in this briefing the president asked Jeff Mason of Reuters to take off his mask because he couldn't hear him. Mason obviously declined, but just again, Trump on masks. And this, as the vaccine, putting aside the science of it all, is becoming a major political issue. Trump yesterday saying it would be ready in record time for a special day, obviously meaning Election Day. This, as Kamala Harris told Dana, that she wouldn't accept Trump's word for it in terms of taking the vaccine. Trump said she should apologize, and Biden saying that he would take the vaccine if it was determined to be safe and effective by scientists, even if it cost him the election. The other major part of stimulus, COVID out of Washington, is the stimulus bill. Trump yesterday defending not getting involved. The Senate Republicans, according to Manu, don't yet have these 51 votes for a skinny bill, which is a big problem for them sticking together. And there's also this looming government funding that is coming at the end of this month, which is all going to get tied up together. On voting, the other part of COVID, obviously the Postmaster General is under fire. The House Oversight Committee is launching an investigation that he pressured former employees to make campaign contributions and then reimburse them. And Trump yesterday saying that he would support DeJoy's removal if there is proof that he broke campaign finance laws. Pam is going to file on the traditional start of what is a very unusual campaign season with all the COVID impact on the election and all the unusual problematic issues that are going to be faced in November. And just to note, Trump today is in Florida. He's expected to announce drilling there. He has a North Carolina rally later. And I think that's what we've got on COVID.
Okay, so let's open it up for thoughts on COVID, please.
Jeff, we should keep an eye on this North Carolina rally that Virginia just mentioned. So North Carolina is a very hard-hit state, much more so than some of the other states that he's recently visited. Has pretty strict rules about masks and social distancing and a maximum of 50-person gatherings. The GOP chairman in Forsyth County, I believe that's where he's going, said that the president needs to wear a mask. He's a guest in our county, and we should just watch the video of the people at the rally because if past is prologue, they won't be wearing masks and they won't be socially distanced, and they will be directly violating all the rules in North Carolina. This a day after, at his press conference yesterday, he specifically asked every reporter who was trying to ask him a question to remove their mask so that he could hear the question.
Okay. Other thoughts, please.
Sounds like our staff meetings.
Anyone else on COVID?
That feels so bad.
Okay, Jeff, I just want to echo what Sam said and about North Carolina, because I mean, obviously we've been covering it, but the president asking them to take their masks off is just symbolic, sort of this whole thing and why masks are the centerpiece of sort of the two sides of the approach to this virus. And I just think, once again, we can't talk enough with our doctors, Sanjay and our other experts, about why masks do make a difference, citing why masks have helped in other places around the world and in certain parts of the country. As the people that live in New York City know, most everybody, if not 99.9% of the people in New York are wearing masks. That is true in a bunch of the states where things are better than other places in the country where people are not wearing masks. And I just think masks. We can't do enough on the importance of masks and the president's opposition to wearing masks because he thinks for some reason that's a victory for him. It's about protecting yourself, but more importantly, protecting other people. And why isn't that a good thing to do? Okay. Anybody else on COVID?
Do we think that this is the dial-in every morning? Probably not.
Okay, Matthew.
I just want to...
Okay, I'll go to California now, in what fire officials are calling an unprecedented disaster, this creek fire
so
in
it's too
Central
risky to ask a
California.
question?
Rescues underway right now, dozens of people
So your
trapped by
recommendation is for me
flames.
not to
This
ask
fire
a
has grown
question?
to 135,000 acres, no containment, mandatory evacuations
All right, sounds good.
in a couple of counties. This morning, we learned from the National Guard that rescue helicopters choppered out 13 people.
While they're talking about
Dozens of
wildfires,
others still
is
sheltering in safe spots. And as I say, it's Ryan Young in Yucaipa, California. We also saw a wildfire in eastern Washington state destroy 80% of the town of Malden. The fires all over the west. The weather team also available on this and the heat and such. Keeping an eye on Portland, we had violent clashes between Trump supporters and counter-protesters in the Oregon Capitol in Salem yesterday evening. Hundreds of cars and loads of Trump supporters and then counter-protesters, the two sides firing paintballs at each other and projectiles. We have Josh and Lucy there. We're keeping an eye for developments in the Jacob Blake case in Kenosha, the Daniel Pruitt case in Rochester, and the Breonna Taylor case in Louisville, where any of those things could happen at any time. And then we're chasing this story in Utah that our affiliates are on. Police reportedly shooting a 13-year-old boy on the autistic spectrum after being called to his home over complaints he was threatening people over a mental health issue. A lot of questions here, as the mother tells one of our affiliates, he's just a boy, why didn't you tackle him? So we're trying to get more on that one. And I think that is it. Okay. International?
So Navalny's still a good story for us. We reported that he's out of a coma, still in a bad situation, but he is responding to verbal stimulus. And separately, a group of Navalny supporters in Russia were attacked by a group who just charged in, threw a load of chemicals over them. 3 of them have been hospitalized. So Matthew Chance is on that story. Melissa Bell is covering Belarus for us. One of the last remaining opposition leaders has been detained at the border. This is Lukashenko defended the police treatment of the student protesters last week. And then finally China. This escalating tension between China and Australia continues. 2 Australian journalists have been evacuated from China by their diplomatic missions after Chinese law enforcement told them that they would be interviewed over a national security case and not allowed to leave the country. So we had this situation develop last week where an Australian TV news anchor was held and is continued to be held. So we're just really seeing the situation escalate between the 2 countries, complementing the WHO. Selena Wan covers that story.
Read the story.
Thank you very much. Washington.
Come on, politics.
So the other story, obviously, is this unprecedented attack on the military, which continues into this week. Barbara and Trump on it yesterday, hammering on the military top officials. Barbara and Ryan are reporting that relations between Trump and the Pentagon are continuing to deteriorate. Bolton over the weekend continuing to say that he had never heard Trump called them losers and suckers, but obviously this story is caused a full-blown meltdown in the White House and is continuing in other two things to mention are the Michael Cohen book. He in an interview called Trump a Cult Leader, among every other adjective he could use to describe Trump. That book is out. Kara's available on it, and Erica Orden did the digital right. And then just with all this talk of Antifa, there's a DHS draft document out this morning that has not yet been put out publicly, but it cites white supremacists as the most persistent threat to the U.S., not Antifa, as the White House would have you believe. And then yesterday, as Biden condemned Antifa. And I think that's it.
Okay, is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up before we move to politics?
Here we go.
Jeff, it's Richard. One other quick story in business. Disney is in the spotlight this morning. Obviously, Mulan debuted on Disney Plus on Friday. They've already faced calls for boycott from a number of Hong Kong activists. The movie now reportedly thanks a number of Chinese communist entities in Xinjiang. This is a region where Beijing had imprisoned millions of Uyghurs and other minorities as part of that movie where it was filmed. Frank Collada is up and watching that now.
Okay, the flip side of that story is that Disney Plus had a huge weekend with Mulan too. So let's make sure we're covering both aspects of that story. And I also think that when I talked earlier about the business of returning to the theaters and the NFL returning this week, there's another storyline out there that theme parks actually have not seen any upsurge in attendance as a result of COVID, and I think we should be looking at that as well. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, it's Cynthia. I just want to bring up a story that we started covering last week about a family in Houston who was evicted because of all of the problems with COVID and the loss of their jobs, and the fact that they have just been able to get a substantial amount of money from a GoFundMe account and will finally find a home. And it's a very heart-wrenching story, so we wanted to just bring it up, and we have video, and we have the family, so we've got a reporter in Houston for that.
Hey, Jeff, Vero, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Vero.
Oh, hi. I wonder with more and more kids starting school, with already so many schools that have started in person in so many other states, is there a way to see, how they're doing and if the cases have actually gone up and what schools have done it right? I know it's hard, but I wonder, a lot of parents are wondering, they're doing virtual school in different states, is it working in some schools, and could there be a possibility, that I would send my kids in a month or two?
Look, I think that, to your point, obviously there's been so much focus on what's happened on college campuses as a result of COVID, which is an important story. But I do think we're going to have to figure out how to tell this story about, education and the return to the classroom of our kids and how that's going and what should be done. Because I think obviously so many people are dealing with this, and there's many different points of view as to whether or not kids should be back full time or not. And so I think we've got to stay focused on it, to your point.
Thanks.
Yep. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, on Trump and the military, I just want to jump in on this. There's been so much attention on the suckers and losers comment, which is right. But I do think that there should be more focus on the what was in it for them, not just that comment, but that sort of way of thinking on Trump's part. What was in it for them? Why did they do this? They didn't make big money. They got killed. On social media, most of the greatest generation is gone, but their children and their grandchildren are out there. And on social media, there's incredible stories and tributes to men and women who were lost and men and women who survived and served heroically in wars dating back to World War I and World War II and on through Vietnam and more recently in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. Incredible tributes to those men and women who served their country as they did, what was in it for them? Well, these family members are telling those stories of what was in it for them and why they're so proud, why they fought for their country, why they did something, whether it was after 9/11, where they signed up and volunteered to join the military because they wanted to do something to in the wake of 9/11 for the country, to defend America, to make America safe, all of those things. And I do think a tape piece with just, it doesn't even have to maybe have narration, I don't know, but sound from the children and grandchildren of any, and some veterans, because obviously Iraq and Afghanistan, those are people who are around and available, so spouses and all of that, I think would be incredibly moving and answer that question about what was in it for them. I think that's a really important question to answer. Obviously, the president has no concept whatsoever of that question, of the answer to that question, because he's asked it multiple times, according to the various reports, and in different situations. But for a lot of people, they have a very good answer to that question. It's about serving your country, protecting your family and your fellow countrymen. And I think that it would be a very moving piece to hear some of these stories. They're all over the place. Lots of people are talking about it. And I think that would be a worthwhile thing for us to do.
This is Brianna. If I could add something on that, I also think, I think we look back to World War II, and there's a lot of people who would have signed up even if they weren't drafted. But I also think part of the confusion for Trump is this all-volunteer force, because his experience being of age where you would serve in the military, you would be drafted, and obviously he got out of that. But this is entirely a generation of people who are volunteering to do it, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of Americans miss. It's actually part of the reason why America is so disconnected from the military, because unlike, decades ago, you only have, I think it's 0.4% of Americans who are currently serving in the armed forces. So you end up with this tiny segment of people in the military and then the people who satellite around them, family members, and they're very separated from civilians who don't have exposure to what they're doing. I mean, if you go back to World War II, I've read articles where it says like every housewife knew the difference between like a battleship and a whatever other thing. Like there was just sort of a I think a lexicon that everybody had about the military, and people don't have it anymore. So I think that's also part of the thing we should focus on, that this is a choice. This is not, because people are not drafted. So this really is folks making a choice. The other thing is that the military is still seen as a bridge to the middle class. So you have a lot of people who are, they're making that choice. And there is, when they're seen about, yes, they're doing it for the country, they're also doing it for the betterment of their family. I don't think they do it without making that decision that they want to do something for their country. But it's also, for families who are trying to make choices to make things better for their kids, they will make this choice. So I also think that's a brave choice.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. Other thoughts? Okay, politics.
Obviously, much of the big political storylines has already been covered. I'll just mention a few things here. The cash crunch in the Trump campaign, the lavish spending that went on earlier in the campaign, and the massive fundraising advantage completely eroded. We talked over the last several months, we've been talking about how Biden's been closing that gap and then had this monster August fundraising, and you see now the Times stories sort of going through what the campaign has been spending money on, and this notion that there's some concern about having what's needed to get through all the way to the end here without perhaps pouring in some personal money from Mr. Trump, or it is obviously a call out to donors, no doubt, but it is worth noting that this was such an enormous advantage for Trump that has been eroded. mostly out of sight today. I think Harris is doing some virtual fundraising, so we'll get some pool report readouts of what she says there. I do want to highlight the new ads from both the Biden and Trump campaigns. The Biden ad, there are two Biden ads out today, but the Biden ad that is about sort of making a choice here between, as the Biden campaign puts it, re-electing somebody who brings out the worst in America versus somebody who will bring out the best in America is sort of it's just a jarring line to hear, but again, drawing the complete sort of leadership contrast between and character contrast between Biden and Trump and the pursuit of a fresh start. They also have a big push, which we've been talking about as well, with seniors on the Social Security Medicare ad. The Trump ad that came out yesterday that I think is worth looking at is this ad that talks, and again, I find it interesting because this is where campaigns spend most of their budget, and this is where most of their money goes. And so this is what Trump's team has on the air in battleground states. It is an ad about the virus, almost being gone with a vaccine nearly at hand and an economic rebound that is near complete. Obviously, it doesn't comport with where Americans perceive things to be right now, and it doesn't comport with reality. But what I find so interesting is it is the Trump campaign with millions of dollars in battleground states trying to communicate on the issue that is front of mind for most people. Again, it may not match reality in its spin and distortion and all that, but it is sort of engaging the public on the issue of the virus and the economy, which is so different from the issues that Donald Trump is actually really trying to engage the public on. I mean, just look at his Twitter feed this morning, back to the law and order stuff and what have you. So the discordant nature between what Trump is doing in his Twitter feed or at his press conferences or what have you, and where they're putting a ton of money to communicate to battleground state voters, I think is interesting and worth noting. Virginia mentioned the story about, and what everybody was just talking about, the disparaging in the military going into this week. You continue to see Joe Biden amped up about that and visibly sort of passionate and angry about it yesterday, calling Trump un-American if those reports are true of what he said. To what Brianna was just saying about sort of also a decision for folks to serve to also be a bridge to the middle class and make a decision for their family, I expect the Biden folks are eager to keep this conversation front and center, and it's not just about trying to win over veterans. It is very much in line with what they see as an ability to chip away at some of that white, non-college educated, blue-collar, upper Midwest critical voters. Again, not to necessarily beat Trump with them, this is his base, but to use this story as an avenue to chip away at some of that support is clearly what's going on today as well. Just to note on the president's travel today to Florida and North Carolina, this is his third trip in as many weeks to North Carolina. So for the third week in a row, he is back in North Carolina, where, as we've discussed, the ballots have gone out and the voting process is underway there. So it's no mistake to have his travel there that way. But it does highlight just how critical that state and staying in Donald Trump's column is part of his path to 270, which, as we've talked about, is a pretty narrow path. And that is why we're seeing him for the third time in as many weeks there in the Tar Heel state. That's it from us.
Okay. Thoughts on politics, please?
Hey, it's David. I have a question for David Chalian. I'm just curious, with the money situation with the Trump campaign, how much is that attributable to Brad Parscale, especially with those sort of allegations of all personal largesse and mismanagement? Or is there a story there, or is it just the whole enterprise?
That is a big part of the story, right, is how he spent the money. And yes, clearly, as we've reported before, a lot of that money was coming back into his wallet. But it is so it is a largely Parscale story. At least the Trump campaign is hoping that's the case, because when Stepien came in, they put in some of these belt-tightening measures. But it is it's not just Brad Parscale, right?
I think we should. Hi. Yes, I think we should really look closely at what Trump's doing relating to, threats to defund education and history and training around systemic racism. His threat to defund the teaching of the 1619 Project by the New York Times. And when he was asked about it yesterday in the press conference, he's like, oh, no, of course I believe in teaching about slavery so we can learn from our past. But then, what are the threats about? And the point is, it's just this, this denial of the remnants and the effects, the active effects of slavery and discrimination. And it's the same about the diversity training. And he ended the press conference because the follow-up question was, well, what about 1619 is unacceptable? Because there's no legitimate answer to that, in my view. And so I do think that we need to look at all of these things. I know Cynthia mentioned it before, this idea of patriotic education. I mean, what is he trying to do, and how is he getting away with that when he's sort of trying to appeal to black voters and other voters and sort of prove that he believes in equality and everything else.
Hey, it's Marcus. I think it's such a good point Janita raises, because it's exactly the opposite of what all of corporate America is doing, right, and trying to be actually anti-racist. It's literally the opposite. But, of course, it appeals to a white backlash that is just tired of all this stuff, right? And so it definitely appeals to his base that he wants to firm up. Yep. Agreed. Look, I think it's part of the bigger story of Trump really running for his base and trying to expand that base, which is really white America, which is why he's doing this about patriotic education, which is why he's doing it about trying to not have the federal government programs have diversity programs. And I think to Janita and Marcus's point, that is part of a bigger, broader, electoral strategy. And I think it's all part of one bigger, broader story. And again, as I always say, we do need to take step backs and do those kind of, what is the strategy behind all of this, rather than just cover today's news. And so I think taking Janita's point, taking Marcus's point, taking the broader strategy of him running that kind of campaign, I think is a really important segment, story, etc.
Hey,
David, I just... Get out of the way.
Put out his list of Supreme Court nominees tomorrow, which we know is absolutely part of that whole strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're going to talk about the story, I think it's unavoidable that you have to talk about the naked racism of Tucker Carlson, because that's really what drove this anti-diversity push. Trump watches Tucker Carlson show and then reacts. And just as sort of the white supremacy hour they have on Fox News every night, I think you can't disconnect the two.
Yeah. So Brian Stelter did that story yesterday, on Sunday Unreliable, where he laid that out and showed how it moved from Fox News to Trump. But it's all part of the concerted effort to go after white America, the white base. Fox News is clearly part of that, and so it's the attack on American history, it's the attack on protecting our monuments, and it's the attack on not requiring diversity training, etc. So I do think it's a big, broad, strategic story that's important. I think the other big step back story, which New Day did this morning, which I think was good, is you look at all of these. You look at all of these tell-all books that are out. The latest one today by Michael Cohen. But you look at the last month that has brought us John Bolton and Mary Trump and Stephanie Wolkoff, and today Michael Cohen. and they all paint a very, they're all a little different, but they paint a very similar picture of Trump. And even if you discount 60% of what they write and what they say, it's still a very damning portrait. So I think you have that. On the other hand, you have to ask, does any of it matter, or is it just fodder for the people who don't like Trump and they can't get enough of it, because we know every one of them is a best-selling book? But for his base, do they just look at it as more fodder that everybody's out to get Trump? So I think that there's different ways to look at that as well. But again, it's a trend, it's a step back, it's a broader piece, and sometimes we've got to not just get caught up in today's news, but look at the broader strategy. Anyone else?
I also think, just to add to that, I think we've had and or have some pieces coming on this, and it's been discussed a little bit on the air. But one of the things about these books is that it's distracted Trump from his moving his campaign message forward, whether that's attacking Joe Biden and painting Joe Biden with a certain brush. This is the Joe Biden, because he's constantly being forced in the last week or so to defend himself against all of these things that have come out, whether it's the Atlantic article, the Cohen book, Stephanie Winston's book a little bit. But instead of, with only 2 months to go, instead of being able to push forward the messages that you want to push forward, whether they're positive or negative, hey, here's everything we've accomplished, which is why you should want us back, or here's why Joe Biden is going to ruin America, those two messages get obscured by the constant need to fight back against these things that are coming out. As example, yesterday's ranting press briefing conference, whatever it was. So there was a good piece written somewhere, and I think I've seen some notes that maybe there's another one coming about why this is actually Trump, the candidate, is hurting himself by not being able to move his own, the message he wants to send forward, again, whether it's positive about himself or negative about Joe Biden, because he's on the defensive about all of these things that are coming out. I think that's interesting.
Okay. Anyone else? The other political story that I would look at is Trump promised a health care plan by the end of August, once again, and we still don't have that. And I would also just suggest to everybody that each of these so-called scandals for Trump, each of these things, we should just once again be careful to say that this is the one that is going to undo him with his voters. We always think that, but we need to make sure we have a sense of what's going on out in the country and not just listen to Twitter. Okay, digital.
Okay, we had around 26, 27 million uniques across the long holiday weekend. So, low in the context of the recent numbers, but extremely high historically. The top videos of the last 24 hours are Trump asking Jeff Mason to take off his mask at the briefing, and then the Borger kind of mini analysis noting Trump's foul mood. Some of the big hits from the weekend include the Trump's attack on military leadership. Liptak had a super strong wrap-up, step back on the character test that Trump faces as the campaign enters the final stretch. We're going to give that a lot of play today. Erica Orden on the Cohen book and the faux Obama that Trump hired to belittle and then fire. And then the California fire sparked by the gender reveal. So those were some of the super strong performers over a strong Labor Day weekend. This morning, it is still Star and Brown, with Trump launching an unprecedented attack on military leadership that he appointed. This has 16,000 concurrents right now. When it went up yesterday, it had like 20,000 concurrents in the evening. It is a huge runaway number one, and audiences have been here for it for a long time. Everything that Brianna was saying, we also want to capture. There's so much interest in the Trump story, and then also just all things military. We've seen that for years. The virus DLE is in the top 5. Joseph Griffin, the black man who was detained while jogging in Florida for fitting a suspect description and then was later offered a job with the sheriff's department, that is in the top 5. The video showing the U.S. Postal Service mail being dumped in a California parking lot, and then the Postal Union saying the USPS employees were not involved. All the updates on that, that's in the top 5. Brownstein's column on Biden's two-front war against Trump, where he explores Biden's strength in the Rust Belt and Sun Belt, is very smart and has been in and out of the top 5 this morning. And then Novak Djokovic being in pain after the U.S. Open incident, his coach says. So it outlines the incident with the line judge, which was all over everywhere this weekend, but then also his very recent rocky month. And then another piece that's just right outside of the top 5 this morning that'll probably be in it really soon is from A.J. Willingham on parents' biggest frustration with distance learning. It's math in many ways. When parents are asked to help with, say, compound fractions and, help recall old knowledge and ways of teaching math that have changed. And that piece is just resonating with a lot of people. Denver, here's a handful of other good headlines and stories that are doing well. Denver is under a winter storm warning watch 2 days after hitting 101 degrees. This is the top post across all of social for us over the last 24 hours. The woman who popularized the gender reveal party says enough already after this latest wildfire. And then, of course, we've got a separate wrapping up the more than 2 million acres burned and power outages for nearly 200,000 people across California. Over in opinion, Joe Lockhart has an excellent op-ed, The 3 Writers Who Could Cost Trump the Election, on Goldberg, Cohen, and Woodward. So that definitely touches some of the discussion we were just having. There's another piece that went up yesterday that is still doing very well. The op-ed headline is Dear White Women, Let's Not Fall for Trump's Racist Bet on Us. This is from novelist Andrea Portez. Why this is your most important flu shot ever. This has a video explainer from Sanjay and then just a really good article on the importance of having your flu shots as soon as you can possibly do it, how to do it safely in the time of COVID, and again, it being super important this time around with the pandemic. We will be watching the markets today very, very closely with what happened with Tesla and pre-trading and the SoftBank being exposed as a NASDAQ whale. So we may end up popping up a DLE on the markets, but for right now, we're just updating that, and we think audiences will be there for that too. Our virus fact versus fiction podcast today is a conversation with a longtime obituary writer for the Chicago Sun-Times. It is a very poignant and powerful one. And then lastly, everyone should check this out, CNN.com/vote-by-mail. It's a new interactive on mail-in voting in the U.S. Everything you need to know by state. It has this very cool made-for-mobile instinctive design. Again, that's CNN.com/vote-by-mail. Check it out. That's it.
Good morning, Jeff. So we're going to push all these vaccine headlines to the top of the shows right now. Elizabeth Cohen handling the vaccine makers' pledge. Fred Pleitgen out of Germany with the announcement from Pfizer and BioNTech this morning. All of us with the backdrop of Trump continuing to make promises and pushing this timeline that most health experts say is very unrealistic. Brianna has vaccine expert Dr. Hotez. We also have former FDA head Mark McClellan on all that, as well as Tom Inglesby from Johns Hopkins and Amesh Adalja. We'll also watch for this 11 a.m. the study results on how people following stay-at-home orders brought numbers down. We have a number of bookings around that. On the college side, Matthew mentioned the West Virginia University story. Really exemplifies in a huge way what's going on nationally at all these colleges, these clusters, and being forced to shut down for a couple of weeks. We have the Dean of Students from West Virginia University joining Brooke. John King has the president of the University of Illinois, so the college angles those two leaders from those two prominent universities. Other domestic whips, Rosa Flores and the Florida numbers. Gene Casares, once the embargo breaks next hour on that New Jersey nursing home lawsuit. Julia Chatterley on the volatile markets and the continuing fragile COVID economy. And Manu Raju gets us to the state of the next stimulus bill, and could we see a vote in the Senate this week? Internationally, we'll make sure we're hitting China, Mexico, and India, and the storylines coming out of there. Politics, Trump hits 2 swing states. Biden doesn't have any public appearances today. John Harwood at the White House, or Trump leaves during the 11 a.m. hour. We'll see if he takes questions. We get to Randy Kaye in Florida around an environmental speech. And then Ryan Nobles in North Carolina. And third trip in just a matter of weeks there. It's just behind that. Jess Eleni, Dana Bash, and Amy Lincoln Henderson on campaign spending. The new Biden ads. The Trump military angle. John King is breaking out a Magic Wall segment looking at the changing ad spending in the battleground states, and what does that tell us? Lauren Fox on the DeJoy probe. The Brianna Show is going after Representative Cooper, who asked the question during that hearing with DeJoy a couple of weeks ago. And finally, Ryan Young and Dan Simon in different shows, but all shows are going to take on the Wildfires of California story, and we are trying to get one of those rescued hikers for later on this afternoon.
Thank you, John. Washington. Morning. Jake's back at 4 o'clock. Caitlin will have our join from the White House. Go to MJ if any Biden news. We'll have analysis as well. The military, the vaccines, the healthcare plan promise. We'll get it all in. Erica has our coronavirus wrap piece, and Sanjay joins, of course, the vaccine latest timeline, the safety pledge, and more. Schools and colleges. Also today, Dr. Austin Baith, who has organized doctors across Iowa to push for a mask mandate. We'll stay on the economy, a stimulus bill, and Clarissa Ward joins with her new book.
And in the Situation Room, we'll be following on all the top trends on COVID as we head into the unofficial start of fall. Will the numbers surge on the heels of the holiday weekend? All of this as we're poised to cross 190,000 deaths. We'll follow on this joint pledge from these 9 top pharmaceutical companies and get to Fred Pleiken with his interview with the BioNTech CEO. We'll get to the millions returning to school, all as student behavior in colleges is derailing campus returns. And we'll follow on this continuing shift in upticks now in West Virginia, Wisconsin, other locations, as well as Florida beginning to see some spikes. We'll watch Fauci at 1 o'clock and also follow these businesses that are beginning to return to normal, like movie theaters, the NFL kicking off the season Thursday. We'll do all that with our Watt and Phil wrap pieces. Out of the White House, we'll follow Trump through the day. We'll see if he talks before he leaves for Florida. All of this ahead of the North Carolina rally. And all of this is he's now continuing to tease a vaccine by Election Day. We'll follow his continued assault on the military and this growing rift with the Pentagon. We'll see where stimulus talks go. And also to your question, where is the health care plan that he promised by the end of August? We'll look at these dueling Trump and Biden ads that David mentioned. We'll get to the wildfires, and we'll keep an eye on the Blake and Crude investigations to see if there are any developments there. That's where we're starting.
Thank you. I do think we should also be asking why John Kelly, Jim Mattis, and H.R. McMaster remain silent, not saying anything for or against. What is it about them and their positions and their service, and why do they say nothing? I think that's something we should be asking too. Other thoughts before we go? Anyone else? Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.